Imagine standing in a circle of packed earth, the air thick with the smell of sweat and the jeers of a bloodthirsty crowd. You are not a soldier, you are a woman, perhaps a widow, perhaps a mother, accused of a crime you swore you did not commit. But in the Middle Ages, your word means nothing against the accusation of a man. The court has offered you a choice that feels like a death sentence. Confess and burn, or step into the arena and fight for your life. This wasn't a duel of honor, it was a judicial nightmare where God was the referee and the verdict was delivered in blood. Trial by combat is often romanticized as knights jousting on horseback, but for a woman, it was a gritty, ugly, and terrifying ordeal. There were no shining armors here. There was only dust, desperation, and a weapon that looked more like a tool of execution than a sword. If you lost, you didn't just die. You were dragged from the arena to the hangman's noose or the pyre. The fight was merely the prelude to the execution. But how could a woman, untrained and often smaller, possibly defeat a man in a fight to the death? The medieval law had a solution. A twisted attempt at fairness that turned the arena into a grotesque game of cat and mouse. They called it the pit. To equalize the strength difference, the male combatant was forced to stand in a hole dug into the earth, usually waist deep. He was planted there like a tree, his movement restricted, his eyes level with the woman's knees. He was armed with a wooden club. The woman, however, was free to move around the edge of the pit. She was given a unique weapon, a large stone weighing several pounds, wrapped tightly in a long sleeve or a cloth sack. It was a primitive flail, designed to crush a skull with a single, well-timed swing. This setup sounds like a bizarre game, but the reality depicted in the manuals of fencing masters like Hans Talhofer is horrifying. The man in the pit is a coiled spring, waiting to drag the woman down into the dark with him. The woman must dance on the edge of the abyss, swinging her stone, knowing that if she slips, or if he catches her clothing, it is over. He will pull her into the hole, and in the confined space, his superior strength will end her life in seconds. It was a contest of agility versus brute force, patience versus rage. But why would any woman agree to this? What kind of horror must she be facing to look at a man with a club and say, "I choose this"? The answer lies in the suffocating nature of medieval justice. For a woman accused of murdering her husband or committing adultery, the legal system was a trap. There were no forensic sciences, no DNA tests, and often no witnesses other than the accuser himself. If a woman was poor or isolated, her denial was worthless. The judicial duel was the nuclear option. It was a legal loophole that allowed her to bypass the biased judges and appeal directly to the highest power of all, God. The belief was absolute. God would not allow an innocent person to die. Therefore, victory in combat was divine proof of truth. For a woman cornered by lies and facing a slow death by torture or imprisonment, the arena offered a sliver of agency. It was terrifying, yes, but it was her fight. It was a chance to hold her destiny in her own hands, gripping that stone-weighted cloth, rather than having it dictated by a man in a robe. But theory is one thing. Reality is another. Let us look at the year 1228 in Switzerland, where this theory was put to the ultimate test in a fight that became a legend. The woman's name was Margareta. She stood on the edge of the pit, looking down at a man named Hans. The accusation was murder. The penalty for losing was death. The crowd watched in breathless silence as the duel began. This wasn't a quick skirmish. It was a grueling marathon of violence. Margareta circled the pit, swinging her stone, trying to crack Hans's defenses without getting too close. Hans spun in his hole. Club raised his eyes, locking onto her ankles, waiting for one mistake. We can only imagine the psychological terror. Every time she swung, she risked being grabbed. Every time he lunged, he risked exposing his head to the stone. It was a dance of death that lasted for hours. Dust choked their lungs. Their muscles screamed. The crowd roared with every near miss, betting on which one would die first. It was a spectacle of raw, unfiltered human survival instinct. And then the moment came. Perhaps Hans tired. Perhaps Margareta fainted. But she saw her opening. Margareta swung her stone. It connected. Hans went down. In the eyes of the law, the blow that dropped him wasn't just physics. It was the hand of God striking down a liar. Margareta was declared the victor. She was innocent. She walked away from the arena alive, leaving the man in the pit to his fate. But her victory sends a chill down the spine when you realize what happened next. Hans didn't just lose a fight. He lost his legal right to live. The moment a combatant yielded or was knocked unconscious, they were judged guilty. For a man, this usually meant he was dragged out of the pit and immediately hanged or beheaded. For a woman who lost, the penalty was often to be burned alive or buried alive, a punishment mirroring the pit she had failed to conquer. The arena was merely a sorting machine for the executioner. This brutality brings us to a darker realization. The system wasn't designed to find the truth, it was designed to provide a show. The crowds loved it. They didn't come for justice, they came for the blood. A trial by combat was the Super Bowl of the Middle Ages. Vendors sold food, people traveled for days, and bets were placed on who would die. It reveals a disturbing truth about human nature. We are fascinated by violence, especially when it is sanctioned by the state. The sight of a woman fighting a man was a novelty, a grotesque carnival act that reinforced the social order even as it seemingly subverted it. But for the woman in the ring, the crowd was just noise. Her world had shrunk to the radius of that pit. The scream of the spectators was the soundtrack to her potential death. And if she won, she was a hero, yes, but she was also marked. She was the woman who had killed. She was the woman who had violence in her veins. Society didn't quite know what to do with a woman who survived the pit. Eventually, however, the spectacle began to lose its holy luster. The church began to whisper a dangerous question. What if God isn't watching? By the 15th century, the cracks were showing. Religious leaders began to argue that asking God to intervene in a fistfight was blasphemy. What if a strong killer defeated a weak innocent? Was God unjust? Or was the system flawed? The rise of literacy and written law also made the trial by battle seem archaic and barbaric. The pen was becoming mightier and more reliable than the sword. The practice faded, outlawed by kings who wanted to centralize power and stop their subjects from killing each other in legal duels. The pits were filled in, the stones were untied from the cloths. The women went back to being silent in the courtroom, relying on lawyers instead of their own right arms. Justice became cleaner, less bloody, but perhaps, in some way, less direct. But the ghosts of those women remain. They haunt the pages of Talhofer's manuals, frozen in ink, forever swinging their stones at the men in the ground. We look back at these trials with horror, judging the medieval world for its barbarism, but there is a strange, dark respect due to women like Margareta. In a world that treated them as property, as children, as second-class citizens, they found the courage to step into the ring and say, "If you want my life, you have to come and take it." They risked a violent, agonizing death for the chance to prove their truth. They were the ultimate underdogs, fighting not just a man in a pit, but the entire weight of a patriarchal history that wanted them to fail. They remind us that the desire for justice and the will to survive is the most primal force on earth. So, the next time you feel the system is against you, remember the woman with the stone, remember the pit, and remember that sometimes you have to fight dirty to survive. If you enjoyed this dive into the dark side of history, smash that subscribe button. We have more stories from the shadows coming soon.